Hello, friends and Hannibal family, and welcome to the Deconstructing Hannibal podcast, where we take the show apart piece by piece. This is Zaya. This is another solo episode this week. The next couple are going to be solo episodes, and then after that, I've got a lot of guests lined up for season 2. These next 2 episodes are going to be about setting, about the new settings of season 2. Okay. Because we're back at the bottom of the plot diagram for season 2, so we're starting over with setting. Now, as always, Hannibal takes place in the general settings that we saw in season 1, which would be Baltimore, Maryland, Quantico, Virginia, DC sometimes when they have to go do federal business, and Wolf Trap, Virginia, right? The places that we saw the most of, that I determined from season 1, that by going through the scripts and looking at which places we see the most of in season 1 were Hannibal's office, Hannibal's house, the BAU, and Will's house, and a little bit of Bedelia's house, right? We still see all of those in season 2. The one that we still see most frequently is predominantly Hannibal's office, followed by Hannibal's house, right? Particularly his dining room. However, we see a little less of Will's house until he gets released from prison, right? And but there are some new settings that we see in season 2 that I feel that they are important either for plot or for characterization reasons, etc. Okay. In season 1, I was talking about the settings as sort of metonymic stand-ins for the characters, which they still continue to be. Hannibal's house and office are still a metonymic stand-in for his character. The BAU, Jack's office, still a metonymic stand-in for his character. Will's classroom, Will's, etc. Right? These new settings that I'm going to be talking about are kind of a little more important in plot and characterization, and they are very often symbolic. They're not necessarily metonymic, but they are symbolic in many ways. Okay, and so I'm going to talk about 4 places today. Okay, these will be 2 episodes. Next episode, I'll talk about 2 other really big places that come up in season 2, and then some more minor ones. But the places I want to talk about today are James Gray's farm, which we see in 2 episodes, right? The courtroom, Hannibal's, I'm going to call it Hannibal's kill barn, and Peter Bernardone's house. As I said in the last episode, to a lot of people, Peter Bernardone might not be a major character, but for a lot of us Hannibals, we consider Peter a major character because he just brings so much to the show, and because Jeremy Davies in real life is such a lovely human being that he's sort of, to us, he's a major character, right? Anyway, let's get started talking about James Gray's farm. And when I'm talking about James Gray, I'm talking about the killer known as the Muralist, right? We see Gray's farm in 2 episodes, in Kaiseki and in Sakizuke. In Kaiseki, and guys, I've got my notes, so if you see me looking, I'm looking at my notes. Those of you watching, those of you listening, you have no idea where I'm looking. Remember, there is a video version of the podcast. You absolutely do not have to go and look at it, but here we go. So in Kaiseki, we see the BAU team begin investigating Gray's murders because of the imperfect cast-offs that are thrown in the river, namely Roland Umber. He wasn't an imperfect cast-off, he was an accident, but we see Beverly Katz consulting with Will about the case. We see Hannibal becoming the, quote, new Will Graham, and being on the crime scene with Jack, which is something that we continue to see happening through season 2, even when Will gets out of prison, that Hannibal is still there consulting on the crime scenes, right? We see in Kaiseki, we see Roland Umber kidnapped in a very sort of, the way that James Gray kidnaps Roland Umber by having his trunk look like on his car look like it's open, and it looks like there's some kind of plastic that's sort of blowing in the wind out of it. The way that James Gray kidnaps Roland Umber to me is very Buffalo Bill. It's also, which is based very much on Ted Bundy's method of kidnapping people, which is that he would fake an injury and then get them to help him with something with his car and then shove them into his car. This is just sort of to pique his curiosity that there's something wrong with his car, right? Um, we see Roland Umber kidnapped, and then we see him stitched into Gray's mural. That all happens in Kaiseki. So we we open season 2 along with going on with what's going on with Will and the BSHCI and all that. So we open season 2 with a really artistic and important murder, right? Or yeah, murders. Um, in Sakizuke, we see Hannibal figuring out where the farm is based on the smell of the corn in the craquelure of and I don't mean to laugh at that. I'm so bad at French that when I pronounce something in French, I am almost 100% positive that I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. So for any of my French fanables, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. I'm doing it like Hannibal does it, like Mads does it. So craquelure, he smells the corn in the craquelure because of course he does, because Hannibal is a super smeller. Like I sometimes think I need to write a fanfic where I have him be like a super smeller for like a fragrance company in Italy, like a fragrance house in Italy or France or something like that, and him be sort of a perfume mastermind or something like that. I think he would do that well. Anyway, so Hannibal smells the corn, corn in the crackle, and figures out that it's a farm with corn. How he then pinpoints exactly where Gray's farm is, I would assume that he goes through the same steps that they do in the FBI of like the where it is could be the distance from where the body floated to and whatever. Anyway, and him then discovering the farm and discovering the Eye of God mural that Gray has created, and then stitching James Gray into the center of the mural to be the reflection in the center of the pupil, because you see that as he's getting into the eye, it's the colors of the skin of the people that he's kidnapped and killed. They're they It's getting darker and darker as he's going into the pupil of the eye. And so that was where Roland Umber was supposed to be, because the eye was supposed to have no reflection, because this was his statement of atheism in that there's nothing looking back at him, right? And Hannibal changes that with his own feeling, and sews James Gray into the center, so there is a reflection, and so then it's indicating that God is looking back at James Gray, right? Who says to Hannibal when he's sewing him in the mural, there is no God. And Hannibal says, not with that attitude. So I don't know if he converted James Gray at the last minute. I mean, I suppose to James Gray, the fact that this person has found him out of the blue and also happens to be a person of his same mindset perhaps would seem heaven sent to him, perhaps, religiously significant. I don't know. Anyway, and then the mural later to be found by Jack and the team, with Hannibal supposedly seeing it for the first time, which is so funny. What's so funny to me whenever Hannibal is there consulting on murders that he has done and supposedly acting like he's seeing this for the first time, like the judge tableau later in this, it's like, okay. Anyway, Will rightly assumes, after seeing the photos of the completed eye, that the killer is the man stitched into the center of the pupil, because he's not like the others. You have that sort of homage to Sesame Street that Bryan put in there. That one of these things is not like the other one, right? One of these things just doesn't belong, right? Will knows that the other killer who sewed Gray into his mural is Hannibal, okay? And he tells Beverly Katso in Takiawase, she's saying, don't say Hannibal Lecter. And he says, I'm saying Hannibal Lecter, because I'm sure he fully believes that the only person that would have this kind of skill to do this, and also the impetus to interfere in this case like this would be Hannibal, right? So as a viewer, this is our context for Gray's Farm, okay? Now, let's talk about where it is, okay? With regards to the physical location as to where it was filmed, I couldn't find exactly where the farm was. The internet gave me 3 different answers, and I did the proof that AI is screwing things up is definitely in the search results that I got for this, because it's telling me it's at this, they filmed it at this university, and then it's telling me that it's at this other university, and then they're telling me that they filmed it at a Scottish Rites temple, which they did film something at a Scottish Rites temple in Hannibal, but that's not till season 3. That's Francis Dollarhide's house. What ultimately I was able to determine is that I'm sure they filmed it somewhere in Canada, okay? Even though it is supposed to fictionally be in Maryland. So Gray's Farm fictionally seems like it's supposed to be in Maryland, because even though James Gray kills people in different states, when his farm and the mural are found by the authorities, the script indicates that there are coroner's vehicles there from 4 different counties, from Montgomery County, from Frederick County, from Carroll County, and from Howard County. All 4 of these are in Maryland. There's places with counties of these names all over the country of the United States. Like there's several of these are here in my home state of Texas as well. But these 4 counties in Maryland, there is a place where all 4 of those counties intersect, called Pars Spring, right? So this is definitely, his farm is definitely in Maryland, okay? The location of the waterfall and the dam and the river that we see, where we see the Parks and Rec guys like accidentally like unsticking the bodies from the dam and then them freaking out, is in a place called Rockwood Conservation Area in Gulf or Aramosa, Ontario. And I want to thank the online set visitor, and from pictures, it seems to me he's also a fanable, at setjetter.com, that has identified where the dam was. And I'm going to show you all a picture of that. Those of you that are listening, you can see these in the notes on the episode. But as you can see, this is the site supposedly in the script in Rockville, Maryland, actually filmed in Ontario, where we see the waterfall and the sort of beaver dam here that they discover the bodies, right? So fictionally, the farm is in Maryland, which is why the falls are in Maryland. In real life, filmed in Canada, okay? Now, when we see, what we see of the farm in the show is the cornfield and the grain silos, okay? So you can see here in this picture of the grain silos, you can see here in this picture of the grain silos, that there's 1, 2, 3 of them that we see. There could be more, and there's sort of a, I think this is called a grain elevator, that like, I think there's a conveyor belt on here that makes the grain go like up to the silo and then down to the silo or something like that. But so we see the grain, the silos and the grain elevator, and of course the cornfields of the farm. And we also see, if you guys remember, Hannibal squeaking up to the top of the silo in his garment bag to see what's going on at the top, because this is the only silo that the door of it has a padlock on it, right? The Eye of God mural was filmed on a soundstage in some filming studios in Ontario, right? With real extras, okay? So the people that you see laying on the floor in the Eye of God, real people, 30 to 40 of them, okay? They're nude, but you can see there's pictures. If you ever, this is another reason why you should get a copy of Art and Making of Hannibal if you can get your hands on it, because in that book you'll see close-ups of the extras laying on the floor and the privacy garments that they're wearing, right? So There were 30 to 40 of them. The floor of the stage underneath the extras was warmed to keep them from getting really cold because obviously it was Canada was cold, right? And in Art and Making of Hannibal, Jesse McLean, the author, spoke to Lawrence Fishburne about this tableau, the Eye of God tableau, and it's funny to me something that Lawrence Fishburne said about this. He said, "You walk into that room and you're immediately hit with all the scent of human flesh and the pheromones that are coming off of everybody, and all you want to do is lay down and go to sleep with them." So I think that would have been interesting if Lawrence Fishburne had laid down and gone to sleep with the extras. But you get the idea of like if you've ever been in a place where there is a vast amount of humanity around you, and a vast amount of that humanity is sweating, let's say, you can definitely smell the human smell around you, right? Also, in Art and Making of Hannibal, production designer Matthew Davies commented that Bryan did want the Eye of God to be in a grain silo, and the eye came from a conference call that they had when they stumbled upon, he says, we stumbled upon a Busby Berkeley set still while we were Skyping. Okay. This is back in the 2000 aughts. Now we Zoom. I don't even think Skype is in business anymore. Anyway, even back then we turned it into a verb. So Skype became Skyping, Zoom became Zooming, right? And in an interview to AV Club's Emily St. James, Bryan confirmed that scenes from the Busby Berkeley movies were the inspiration for the Eye of God. Okay, and I've pulled a couple of those just for you guys to see, and I'll describe it for those of you listening. So the first one we see here is from the Busby Berkeley movie Dames. Okay, and so you can see Busby Berkeley was sort of known for having, because he directed musicals, and he directed, he was a he was a choreographer, and he was a Broadway guy before he went on into Hollywood in the 30s. And so this is from the movie Dames, and so he was known for these sort of overhead shots of dancers, men, women, a lot of times women, and having them arranged in a sort of like design that could only really be seen and appreciated from overhead, right? And so you can see by looking at this picture where you have, oh God, I don't know, 12 to 15 ladies all laying in a circle in their dancers' outfits with their knees kind of bent, and they're in a circle with kind of a big circle outside of it, and then a black circle, and then there's a like a starburst pattern around them, very eye looking, right, with regards to this being the outer part of the eye, this being the iris, and then the pupil. So you can see how that was definitely inspiration. Just looking at another one, this is another arrangement of women from a Busby Berkeley movie called From Footlight Parade, and so you can see how the in this picture they actually kind of look a lot like those inflatable dolls, but but you can see how all their legs are in the same sort of scissored arrangement, and they're, they are creating a pattern with their bodies. Okay. Also, Bryan said in the same interview that another inspiration was a scene from the 2001 horror film Jeepers Creepers, a scene in which Derry, one of the main characters who was played by Justin Long, discovers the killer's lair and discovers that the bodies of many humans have been somehow cemented or like cocooned in the ceiling of the cave lair. So, for example, here's a picture from that scene. This is Justin Long standing off to the side here. And you can see that there are human beings sort of stuck to the ceiling of and sort of stuck into the walls of this cave. I'm assuming that they perhaps were cemented up there or somehow stuck up there, but you can see how this combined with the Busby Berkeley images definitely could have given rise to the Eye of God tableau, which you can see a picture of here. I've got the person missing in the middle, but you can see based on those other images, all of the people sort of arranged in a, and this is supposed to be depicting an iris, okay, the sort of striations in an iris on the outside with the lighter colored people, and then the darker colored folks in the middle or the pupil, right? And so you can see how those two inspirations definitely could have led to the eye of God here. Um, it is notable that in Jeepers Creepers, the bodies are preserved to stop them from decaying, and some of them are sewn together, just like in Hannibal. Okay, so so you can see how Bryan is a master of remix, and so you can see how those all of those ideas were remixed together into the Eye of God. Okay, um, the import of the setting here of Gray's Farm, the reason why it's important is the simple sort of rusticity of a corn farm and that of farming, okay? In fact, farming is actually the world's oldest profession, okay? They say that prostitution is the world's oldest profession, but I would assume it's probably farming, okay? Maybe they both happened at the same time, okay? Um, and we have James Gray creating an artwork out of his own existential crisis about the existence of God and his own place in the universe, a work that he must have engineered for no one to see, unless we can assume that if Hannibal had not caught up with him, that he would have somehow exposed it to the world and then escaped. But although it seems to me that the mural was solely to help him work out his own feelings, I don't really think that James Gray ever intended for anyone to see it. Now, whether or not he was going to commit suicide when he finished, or he was just going to keep it there and look at it when he wanted to, I don't know. But I don't necessarily feel that he intended it to be seen, because who knows? Okay. But many artists have done such a thing. Most of them just do not meaning that many artists, and to this day still, use their art to help them work out their own existential crises. It's just that most of them don't use bodies as a medium, unless you go see the body worlds exhibit, right? The setting of Gray's Farm is important to the main storyline because it parallels Gray's search, his existential, but his internal search, to that of the search that Will is making in his own mind. Okay. In a lot of the interviews that I've read about season two to prepare for doing season two, and from season one, Bryan kept repeating the idea that a lot of the killer of the week killers and the cases that were going on there were always meant to parallel or flank or some way complement the main storyline of what's going on with Hannibal and Will, right? Um, and so, just like James Gray is searching, Will is searching. They're both searching internally, and they begin making deadly moves in the world around them as a result of that search. Okay. James Gray kills people. Will sends Matthew Brown to kill Hannibal. He begins interfering in the world around him in ways that he wouldn't have done in season one, right? Um, it also continues the characterization of Hannibal, quote, coming in the guise of a mentor, okay, which Will says he does this for Abigail, for Randall, for Francis Dollarhide, for Margot, um, for a little bit for Bedelia, a little bit for Will, but well, Will, he comes in the guise of a mentor, although we see their relationship becoming more one of equals as we go into season two, which I'll discuss more in the upcoming Hanagram episodes that I'm going to do later in the season. I've determined that every season I'm going to do a couple of Hanagram episodes where I'm talking about the development of the Hanagram plotline in that season. So I did a couple for season one. That's episode 7 and 8, and I'll do it again in season 2. Right. So Gray's Farm is important to not only parallel Will's internal search, but it's also important to continue the characterization of Hannibal's MO as coming to people in the guise of a mentor that he then begins to coerce and manipulate. Right. Okay, so now moving from Gray's Farm to another other important setting in season 2, we have the courtroom in which in which Will is on trial for the copycat murders that he didn't commit, right? We see the courtroom in one episode only, I believe, yes, and that's Hassun, okay? The courtroom was a set, okay? It was a pre-existing set. This is a quote from Jesse McLean's Art and Making of Hannibal. He says, "The courtroom set was a previously existing one, but the production design team went about refitting it to suit the needs of Hannibal, setting it apart from standard TV courtrooms. Not only does the space have greater texture in the contrast of warm timber and cool stone, but daylight bleeds in from the windows above the jury with the antiseptic sting of sunlight." Okay. And so, for example, here's a picture of the courtroom. Okay. You see these windows, they have this sort of yellow stripe going through them. To me, they kind of remind me of the curtains in Hannibal's house or the curtains in Hannibal's office. Okay. And you see the sort of bright lights. Right over here is the jury box. When I was watching this again, she's doing her opening statement, and I don't understand why there's nobody sitting in the jury box unless they were practicing and the judge was like approving. I think sometimes in trials the judge approves the opening statements before the jury hears them and approves the closing statements before the jury hears them or something. I don't know. Anyway, they're not there. They could be on the other side of this picture. But and that could be gallery. I don't know. That should be the jury. Anyway, so you see the prosecutor, and you see the sort of coldish marble floors, but then you have these sort of warm and the cold, cool stone walls, but then you have this sort of warm wood and the judge's bench and the thing and the sort of wall behind him and the tables and etc. Okay, it's um it's continuing that same brutalist theme that we see in the BAU. Brutalism with regards to the government buildings was a very predominant influence in Matthew Davies' designs for Hannibal. But also because, as I discussed in the episodes I did about the season 1 settings, this is a government building, and many government buildings of the 80s and the early 90s were built in a brutalist style. For example, the FBI J. Edgar Hoover building, if you look at that, it's a classic example of brutalism. But it also gives a sort of clean and calm feeling, just like the BAU does, the idea that things will be brought out into the light and examined as they are in the BAU and supposedly will be in the courtroom. Okay. And so this overwhelming amount of light and shininess here, I believe, is to give that sort of, this is quote unquote where the truth will be found, even though it's not. This is where the truth will be found, in the same way that they go looking for truth. Because if you think about it, looking at it and thinking about the colors and the tones and everything of the BAU's morgue that we see and the processing rooms and whatever, this is all very similar. Okay. Also, Matthew Davies says of the courtroom set, he said, "I did huge classical paintings at both ends of the corridor and above the judge. All of the paintings have lateral references to the show." Okay. And so there's a painting that's at the other end of the courtroom, but there's a painting behind the judge. And in the courtroom set, this is what it looks like. You see Judge, I'm about to die, sitting at his bench. This is from a scene where Jack is testifying. And you see the large mural of this painting behind the judge. Okay. The name of this painting, and I'm going to show you the original painting here, is the name of this painting is the Triumph of Justice by Gabriel Metsu, who was a Dutch painter. Okay. In the painting, you see the depiction of Lady Justice as we've seen her before. She's blindfolded. In one hand, she's holding scales, and in the other hand, she's holding a sword. Okay, the blindfold is to represent sort of the supposed impartiality of the justice system. The sword is representing the authority of the law in order to, to decide verdicts and whatever. And then the scales are representing the weighing of the evidence and the arguments. Okay. Then later in the episode, when Hannibal goes and kills the judge, and remember, Matthew Brown kills the bailiff, Hannibal kills the judge, right? When Hannibal goes and kills the judge, he mimics this painting in the tableau that he has of the judge, because of course he would, he's Hannibal. So let's look at the tableau of the judge, okay? As you can see here, and those of you listening, I'm showing a tableau of the judge. Just remember in your mind the judge. The judge is being suspended by some chains, okay? This is sort of similar to, has always been sort of similar to the tableau in Silence of the Lambs that Hannibal does to Boyle when he escapes. But the judge is suspended on chains. He's got the sword in the one hand and he's got the scales in the other, and he's blindfolded, but his head has been sawn open and his shirt is covered in blood. And in the scales is, on one of the scales is his brain, and on the other of the scales is his heart. This also gives a bit of autopsy imagery, because when they take organs out of you during an autopsy, they weigh them, right? But you can see that the tableau is right in front of his bench, and the picture of Gabriel Metsu's The Triumph of Justice is just right behind the judge. So you can see, therefore, that the killer, Hannibal, is trying to say to the people that discover this very much that he is attempting to mimic the painting behind it. Later in this episode, when Hannibal is brought to help Jack investigate this, once again, like he's never seen it before, Hannibal says, not only is justice blind, it is mindless and heartless, okay? Because this is after they wouldn't accept the new defense that Will wasn't guilty because the bailiff killing, the killing of the bailiff, showing all the different methods that the copycat used brings some doubt into whether or not there's actually the real killer out there. Okay, this is the thing, of course, that springs Will from prison, because basically he couldn't have done this. He was in prison, right? The idea here is that justice will prevail, okay, even under difficult circumstances. Well, not in this. In the actual painting, excuse me, I jumped around in my outline. In the actual painting, the idea is that justice will prevail even in difficult circumstances. In Hannibal's depiction of the judge, the idea is that justice is not possible because the people who are doing the judging are incompetent, are uncompassionate, etc. Okay. With regards to the Hassun episode and the courtroom episode, okay, Bryan said to the AV Club that he was apprehensive doing the courtroom episode because he was so unfamiliar with those types of shows, like court shows like Law and Order or whatever. But that he had to do it because they had to, quote, address the reality of what would be happening, that they would be going into a pre-trial situation with Will, right? Then later he said, in a later interview with Davy Club, he says, I think for me, it was basically looking back on the episode, on the season 2, and Emily St. James is asking Bryan, like, what would you have changed in this season if you could have changed anything? And he said, I think for me, the courtroom episode is one that if I could do the season again, I would eliminate, just because it was such a departure from the style of the show. And it felt like we weren't doing anything particularly special in it that validated its existence in the lexicon of the season. That would be the one that I would take out into the field and tell to stare at the flowers, which is funny. Anyway, I agree with Bryan's initial assessment that this episode was necessary. I understand that and I think when I look back at the script for this episode, Bryan was not a writer on this episode, so that also might be another reason. I think it's one of the only, or maybe the only episode that he wasn't writing on, and so perhaps he felt disconnected from the episode because he wasn't involved in the writing process of the script. I would imagine he was always involved in a certain way, talking to people and advising the writing team. But anyway, But I believe that the Hassun episode with the courtroom and the trial was necessary. It was necessary for the plot. And also, it's just, we can't let go of things like the absolute drama of Freddie's appearance, and that courtroom outfit she's wearing is with the hat. Chilton's testimony, and then Staggy, the man Stag sitting on the witness stand in Hannibal's suit was absolutely worth whatever uncomfortability there was in the episode, and was also worth what happened to Will's hair, which, for those of you who are listening, you cannot see what I like to call the tragic hair. This is the most tragic that Will's hair ever was. Now, obviously, he's in prison. His hair is getting shaggy because he's not getting regular haircuts, okay? I assume they let you get haircuts in prison, but probably not quite as often as you do in real life, right? So his hair is getting shaggy. But this looks like somebody attacked him with a round brush, okay? Like, his bangs are all curled under. On the sides, it's like so fluffy, and they're curling under. I mean, and it looks like, God forgive me when I say this, it looks like Sophia's hairdo, Sophia from the Golden Girls. This looks like her hairdo. And I wouldn't say that necessarily Sophia and Will Graham have a lot in common, except that I do think that Sophia would cut a bitch. Here you have Sophia relating the time that she murdered a guy. Picture it, Sicily, 1922. Anyway, this hair. And so the way that I deal with this hair, and I know it was, it was what it was, right? But the way that I deal with this hair is that I imagine that, and that someday I will write this fanfic, is that Truvy Jones from Steel Magnolias, and we have a picture of the lovely Dolly Parton here, is for some reason in the Baltimore courthouse. Perhaps her wayward son, Louis, the one where she said the greatest thing I could say about his girlfriend is that all her tattoos are spelled correctly. Perhaps her wayward son, Louis, has gotten himself into some trouble in Baltimore, on his sort of motorcycle trip across the nation, and Truvy's there to bail him out, and she sees Will going into his trial looking all scruffy, and she's touched by his story and decides to fix his hair for him before he goes into trial. And so now he reeks of Aquanet instead of Old Spice. He was like, "Oh, you poor thing, you can't go to trial with your hair looking like that. Let me fix it. I'll fix it. We'll fix it." Right? like she tells Shelby after she has her diabetic attack, "We'll fix it." Right? And like pats him, right? So in my mind, that's where Will's tragic hair comes from, is that Truvy Jones intervened. Anyway, talking about the courtroom setting and its importance, okay? It's important thematically in showing that true justice is often subverted, right? There's no justice happening in the courtroom because Will has been framed and is being tried, possibly for his life, for murders that he has not committed. Okay. Justice can be manipulated and sidetracked, which is a running theme in the show. Hannibal is ultimately never punished for his crimes. Yes, he's put in the BSHCI, but he's not executed because he is, they have him declared insane, knowing full well that there's no treatment that will ever help Hannibal, right? Part of the reason that they keep him alive is because they want to study him. Chilton wants to study him, and Lana wants to study him, and they want to write books and make money, right? Alana didn't write a book, but anyway, she could have. So the idea of the courtroom setting and the tableau of the judge is that about this, Hannibal is correct, and that justice is often subverted and it can be manipulated and sidetracked, which is a theme that we see running through the show. A theme that we see later with Peter, right? Now, going from the courtroom to something involving Hannibal more. So the courtroom is focused a lot on Will's character progression. This next place is a place where we that has more to do with Hannibal. Hang on, liquid. Gotta love iced coffee. Okay, so the next place that I'm going to be talking about is what I like to call Hannibal's kill barn. I call it the kill barn. The script only refers to it as a Virginia barn. And then the show points out that it is in Somerville, Virginia. Okay. In the episode that it's discovered, Jack, or the episode after it's discovered, Jack says that the property was foreclosed on years ago and then Hannibal took it over. Okay. And when Jack is driving to it, they do a sort of aerial shot where you can see that it's out in the middle of nowhere. Right. Um, the driving time between Somerville, Virginia and Baltimore, Maryland is about an hour and 45 minutes. So it's about 96 miles away. Now, I suppose if you have killer things to do, you will, accept that drive. I can drive across Houston and it take an hour and 45 minutes. So anyway, so in the show, we see several parts of the barn. Okay, the kill barn. The first part we see is sort of the exterior, and we can see that it's just sort of a barn. It's, it looks a little bit more like a house to me, but it is a barn. I don't know much about barns. Obviously, it's snowy when Jack goes to visit it. It's in Somerville, California. It's got a couple chimneys on top, so there must be a couple of like fireplaces or heaters or furnaces or something in there. It's got some windows, but they're boarded up. Okay. And then in the interior, there's a lot of stuff going on in the interior of the barn, but the main place that we see is called the cistern room. And a cistern room would be a room where you have cisterns that collect rainwater that then as a farmer you would use for things like irrigation and watering crops and like whatever. You could even use it for drinking water if you had to after filtration, right? And so the cistern room is where we see that Jack later finds Miriam Lass is in one of the cisterns. Okay. So in the barn, according to the script and things that we see, Hannibal has potted trees, which are invariably the ones that he used to create the Sheldon Isley tree tableau, right? We even see, like later on, we see branches that he's obviously pruned off the trees as he's, probably about to move the tableau. We also see his autopsy table and all of his instruments. He's got a big freezer. We see the remnants of Beverly's murder with the glass panels and all the jugs filled with her blood, right? And I would assume that Hannibal would have wanted to donate the blood somewhere, but yeah, it would immediately that would have immediately probably gotten him caught, right? Anyway, in this barn, like I said, Jack finds Miriam Lass at the bottom of one of the cisterns in a filthy fucking nightgown. Okay. And quite frankly, I don't think this looks like it's enough to keep her warm. So thanks, Hannibal. You're supposed to be, merciful in your killing and your whatever. And the fact that, that she's filthy, you couldn't even drop her down like a bucket of water and some wipes or something like that. And God knows this nightgown is not keeping her warm. But anyway, so the barn, the kill barn, is one of Hannibal's hidey holes. Okay, he's got the kill barn. He's got the house on the cliffs. He's got the basement in his house in Baltimore. He was supposed to have a tunnel system that went under Baltimore, like steam tunnels, but they couldn't make it work. He probably has more hidey holes and hiding places that we don't ever see, because this is something that's canon from Harris. Harris has Hannibal hide things lots of places. He even hides things in plain sight. And for this, I have to read you guys this quote from the book Hannibal, because to me it's a perfect example of how a Hannibal hides in plain sight, just in the same way that he hides his crimes in plain sight. Okay. Just before Hannibal leaves Italy to return to the US, he goes to this church. And in this church, there's a very famous piece of armor called the Devil's Armor. Okay. And Harris writes, the Devil's Armor with its horned helmet is a splendid suit of 15th century Italian armor that has hung high on the wall in the village church of Santa Reparata, south of Florence, since 1501. In addition to the graceful horns shaped like those of the chamois or chamois, the pointed gauntlet cuffs are stuck where shoes should be at the ends of the greaves, suggesting the cloven hooves of Satan. 3 take communion, though Dr. Lecter touches his lips to the cup with some reluctance. The priest completes the benediction and withdraws. The women depart. Dr. Lecter continues his devotions until he is alone in the sanctuary. From the organ loft, Dr. Lecter can just reach over the railing and, leaning between the horns, raise the dusty visor on the helmet of the devil's armor. Inside, a fish hook over the lip of the gorget suspends a string and a package hanging inside the cuirass where the heart would be. Carefully, Dr. Lecter draws it out, a package, passports of the best Brazilian manufacture, identification, cash, bank books, keys. He puts it under his arm beneath his coat. So he hides all of his get out of town, his go bag stuff, his get out of town papers and whatever inside the visor of a medieval suit of armor inside an Italian church. This is part of the reason that we Hannibal lovers love Hannibal, because there's just nobody like him. He does everything with panache, right? Now back to the kill barn, another one of his hidey holes. When you look at the pictures of the kill barn, it seems almost antithetical for Hannibal to be working in a place that's so dusty and rustic. Like, it really doesn't seem to go with his style in general. But obviously, his desire to kill and not be caught overrides the aesthetics of the place in which he does it in. Right? Hannibal leads Jack and the BAU and Team Sassy Science to the kill barn on purpose, because he now wants Miriam found, and in order to lead them to someone else. So he's leading them to Miriam, and then he's leading them away. That's why he has the tree with the madrona bark that is only found in this area. So then they find the barn. So then they find Miriam, and then Miriam will lead them in a different direction, which is to Chilton, right? Will says to Jack in Yakimono, he says, the Chesapeake Ripper didn't bring Miriam here to kill her. He brought her here for you to find. And Jack says, the Ripper isn't destructive. He doesn't want to get caught. And Will says, he wants you to catch someone like he wanted you to catch me. Somewhere in all this evidence, you will find something that will lead you away from Hannibal Lecter, which it does in the fact that he has brainwashed Miriam into believing that the voice that was speaking to her was Chilton's voice, right? This setting of the kill barn is important because it gives the viewer a peek into some of the machinations, Hannibal's machinations behind the scenes. We don't ever see much of it. We see so little of how Hannibal actually commits his murders and how he stages the tableaus, okay? Part of the reason is because it would be kind of like, seeing the what goes on behind the magic trick. You know what I mean? I was never a person that I wanted to know how they did the trick. I'm like, just let the trick be. We all need a little fantasy and magic in our life. It's the same thing as sort of if you reveal the way that Hannibal did all these things, you'd be kind of killing the magic. But also, I would assume budget concerns and other issues. This is a rare look that we get into one of his workshops, which is fascinating, but it's also very chilling for the viewer, okay? Throughout the series, there's sort of a push and a pull between the viewer and Hannibal. Like, we begin to cozy up to Hannibal. He endears himself to us. We like him. We are charmed by him, okay? Then just when we're comfortable, he bites us in the face, right? He seemingly kills Abigail. He shoves her decapitated ear down Will's throat. He kills Beverly, a character we love and one of Will's only allies. And when in the interview that I was reading with Bryan for season 2 with AV Club, he keeps saying that part of the reason that these things keep happening to these people is because anybody who's an ally of Will's is going to get it, because Hannibal cannot have them interfering in his plan, right? That's why what happens to Georgia happens to Georgia. That's why what happens to Miriam happens to well, not Miriam. What happens to Beverly happens to Beverly, right? And everything in Mizumono happens. So the idea being that there's a push and a pull between us and Hannibal, between the viewer and Hannibal, is that once we get to where we're liking him too much, then the writers decided, okay, now it's time for him to bite the viewer in the face. Like, you thought Hannibal was this person and he's not, right? because this is supposed to mimic how psychopaths, sociopaths, serial killers can hide in plain sight and lure in victims. We're supposed to have that sort of same experience of us being lured in by Hannibal, and then all of a sudden, like, oh my God. It's like, no, oh my God, you can't ever forget who he is, right? Um, this also mirrors the plot line in season 2 later when Will is released from prison and we begin the honeypot trap to lure in Hannibal. Like, just in the same way that the viewer is lured in by Hannibal's charm and intelligence and beauty and whatever, then when we start the honeypot trap in season 2, Will begins luring in Hannibal. Bryan told the AV Club about this. There's some fun in laying it out there for Hannibal to actually look at Will Graham and see that Will is playing things honestly with Hannibal. I think that's what's so seductive. Will is opening up a bit, but he's opening up like a Venus flytrap for Dr. Lictor. And I really would love to have a piece of fan art of Will as a Venus flytrap and Hannibal being entranced into him. I'm pretty sure that Zillow would be the perfect person to draw that. But anyway, now moving from Hannibal's kill barn to one of the last major settings that we see in the season, which for me, as I've said before, Peter is a major character, is Peter Bernardone's house. Okay. And I'll talk more about the sort of significance of Peter's name when I do the episode about Peter. Okay. But for right now, I'm just talking about his house. Okay. We see Peter in 2 episodes. We see him in the first episode where we're introduced, and then we see him in the Randall Tier episode, which I believe is immediately following. I believe that's Su-zakana. But we only see his house in Su-zakana. Okay. The description of Peter's house in Su-zakana from the script says that it's an animal rescue. It says 2 weathered buildings stand in a rustic setting, the animal rescue, and beyond it, a large animal barn where the black horse looks out over its stall door. Jack knocks on the door frame and the room explodes with noise. On every wall, floor-to-ceiling metal cages contain small wild animals in different stages of medical care. Raccoons, skunks, squirrels, and birds of all kinds, all now going crazy with agitation. Okay. Peter's house and the stables that he works at are never designated where in the script, like what state we're in or what city we're in or whatever. It just says that Peter lives in this animal rescue barn, floor to ceiling with cages. We never see where Peter sleeps because it's not important, because he lives among his animals. Okay. Peter is so empathetic to the animals that he doesn't want to be away from them for even a moment. So he lives among his animals, right? So we see the exterior, we see that main room where all the cages are, and then we see the stable part with the black horse, and he's got some sheep in there. Peter apparently has a truck. So if you look at the exterior of Peter's house here, you see the barn. Okay, there's got to be, perhaps he sleeps in this. There's a little building at the back. For those of you not seeing this, there's the barn, and then there's a little building at the back. Perhaps he sleeps there. And then we see the black horse, and Peter has a truck. Okay. We see the house later we see the house again later when Will comes to bring him the bird that they found in Sarah Craver's chest. And again, we see the house and the stable when Peter is sewing Clark Ingram alive into the body of the black horse that Ingram killed, which is the same horse that kicked Peter in the head. Okay. Which shows you Peter's ability to forgive, right? That part in the stable, he also has the sheep there. Hannibal goes to pet them. Who knows what they're thinking. So here's a picture of the interior of Peter's house. And you can see the sort of, very barn-like structure on the inside here. And you can see all the cages of the animals. There's straw all over the floor. It's very clearly a barn that's being used as a place to house many animals in cages that are being treated in some way, right? Later, of course, we see when very upset, very confused Peter begins sewing Clark Ingram alive into the belly of the horse who Ingram had killed, and that's when we see Will and Hannibal come upon him doing this, right? Um, this is also where we see um, Hannibal petting the sheep, which there's a lot of jokes about it. This scene gets joked about a lot with the sheep, and then also the picture. I don't have the picture of it, but the picture of Hannibal making the "what the fuck" face when Will asks Peter, "It is your social worker in that horse?" And Hannibal's face goes, "What?" Like this is even crazy to Hannibal. Okay, so if it's crazy to Hannibal, it's pretty crazy, right? Um, the setting here of Peter's house is important because of the parallel that we have being made between Will and Hannibal's relationship and Peter and Clark's relationship. Like Will, and so we see an analog between Will and Peter. Like Will, Peter is a very empathetic person, specifically for animals, just like Will is with dogs. Peter is an example of another empath who has that compassion that is being used against him, just like Will's empathy has been used against him throughout the series by Jack, by other people in the BAU, by Hannibal, etc. But unlike Will, the way that Peter is unlike Will, um, is that Peter doesn't have the inherent compulsion to murder. He's a healer. He's solely 100% a healer. Um, what he did with Sarah Kraber's body, putting it into the horse, he didn't kill her. He didn't kill the horse, right? In his mind, that was making it better, right? What he just does to Clark Ingram is so out of character for him because if Ingram hadn't torn his way out of the horse, it would have resulted in his death because I would assume he would have ultimately suffocated inside the horse. But this is also Peter's way of trying to stop Ingram from killing him and killing others. And so doing this like basically he didn't actively kill Clark Ingram. I would assume he incapacitated him somehow. We see him focusing on the hammer that Clark has in his hand. So I would imagine they tussle. He takes the hammer and knocks him out and then puts him inside the horse. Perhaps he thinks that Clark is dead. But that's so out of character for Peter because he's such a healer. All he cares about is taking care of wounded things that you get the feeling he's you don't get the feeling Peter is too kind and he's too pure to be suffering this type of pain, to have to do these kinds of things. And it breaks Will's heart for him because we see Will say to him in Su-zakana, Peter says he deserves to die. So I guess he doesn't assume that Clark is dead. He says he deserves to die, talking about Clark, and Will says, but you didn't deserve to kill him, meaning I don't want this for you. I don't want you being a killer to be something that happens to you, right? Peter's home is a testament to his compassion, and what happens to him is a testament to what often happens to empaths in the real world, which is that they are used and that they are twisted totally out of and when they're used, they either become totally twisted out of shape and broken, or they become like the people who use them. They harden themselves and they become more ruthless. Okay, Will is attempting to save Peter from the fate that he believes awaits him as a result of his relationship with Hannibal. Right. Um. So he's. I mean, all through this episode, you can see Will feeling himself in Peter's place. Right. It's just that Peter, he's not a killer. Will has the inherent feeling of killing inside of him, and Peter's is the exact opposite. He wants to save things. He wants to help people, right? He's a wonderful character. So, those are some of the four major new settings that we see in season 2. Um all of these places enhance something in the story. They enhance something about the conflict or the theme or dramatic irony, like with the judge, or characterization, which all stories do. All stories do that, where we have plot elements and setting as a plot element that is enhancing parts of the plot, right? But in season 2, as we begin to shed the sort of procedural structure, the sort of killer of the week thing that we had from season 1, we see how every place becomes more tightly woven into the main plot line. Everything in season 2, in my opinion, is more purposeful. Not that season 1 wasn't purposeful, but that season 2, everything, there's like less that could be left out. There's less that could be cast off. Everything is tighter, more tightly woven, more intricate, more significant, and more symbolic. Okay. In season 1, I talked about the settings being metonomic, like I said before. These new settings are sort of driven by symbolism and theme. And all of the plot lines begin to parallel the main plot line even closer. So all of even the killers of the week begin to mirror the main plot line even closer. And so the show, if you think about the show, the metaphor I'm giving here is sort of like fabric, okay? The fabric of the show in season 2 is sort of more tightly woven and more intricate, just like I indicated when I was discussing that the episodes in season 2 are named after Japanese meal names as opposed to the French meal names in season 1, and that Japanese meals in comparison to French food is more intricate and more symbolic, okay? French food has its own intricacy and symbolism, but I mean, you look at a plate of sashimi or anything from a kaiseki meal, and hell, just watch an episode of Iron Chef and watch Morimoto make something. You can see the intricacy, the delicacy, and there's no waste. There's nothing wasted, right? There's just exactly what you need on the plate. There's not too much. There's just enough, right? And that's what we get in season 2. Everything is tightly woven and purposeful, and it's just enough. It's not more than we need, right? And which is beautiful in storytelling, because for me, as a writer and a talker, sometimes I give you a lot more than you need. That has always been my biggest problem, is editing myself, right? And I'm going to edit myself right now by wrapping this up, okay? And so those are the first 4 major new settings that we see in season 2. Gray's Farm, the courtroom, Hannibal's kill barn, and Peter Bernardone's house, okay? Along with all of the other main ones that we always see: Hannibal's house, BAU, BSHCI, etc. Okay, so let's wrap up this discussion. If you guys are looking for me, you can find me on Blue Sky. I'm Sahaya74 over there. Or you can find me on Instagram. I am Sahaya the Fannibal at Instagram. I have a Patreon. So if you want to, it's called just Deconstructing Hannibal. Obviously, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, this YouTube channel. Those of you that are watching, which is Deconstructing Hannibal with Sahaya. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you are a Hannibal family and you think you want to be on an upcoming episode, I have lots of episodes upcoming in season 2. Just reach out to me and let me know. Let me preview for you guys next episode. Next episode will be another solo episode, and then after that I will have guests. I'm going to be covering the other settings of season 2 that we see that are new. I'm going to focus on 2 very important places. One of them being Will's cell in the BSHCI. And I've covered the BSHCI before in season 1. I did a whole episode about it in the BAU. But Will's cell is very specific to season 2, very specific to the struggle that Will is going through in the first part of season 2, which I'll call like season 2A. Basically, to me, season 2 is season 2A, which is everything up to Yakimono when he's released and goes to Hannibal and says, I want to start therapy again. And then season 2B starts with Su-zakana, and it's everything in the honeypot trap, right? Same thing with season 3. We have it into 2 pieces where we have the Italian arc and then we have the Red Dragon arc, right? So in season 2A, Will's cell in the BSHCI sort of functions almost as its own place and is very important. And I got to talk about the bloody sink and all that, right? And then I got to talk about Muskrat Farm. Muskrat Farm is one of the first solely new places that we've seen with the introduction of the characters of the Vergers, right? Um, but we need to talk about these as they are woven into the storyline. And the Verger Farm has actual canon in Harris that I need to talk about. There's also some other more minor places that I'll discuss, but the two main things I'm going to be talking about next episode is Will's Cell in the BSHCI and Muskrat Farm. Okay. So let me say, as I always do to my Hannibal family, I love you guys. I hope everything is going well. If it's not, please reach out to someone in your Hannibal family for help. We are practically on all platforms, social media platforms, so you can hopefully find one of us if you need us. If Bryan is listening or watching, I would say, hi, Bryan. I love you. I hope everything's going well. And I want to say to you guys, as I always, 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 always do, remember, it's fine to be weird because all the best people are. Thanks for listening. Bye.